Do you remember in 2016 when it was Trump versus Clinton? And virtually every poll that came out said that Clinton was winning. You ever wonder if maybe there's a more accurate way or maybe a more accurate method to figure out who is winning or predict who is going to win? Well, I've got that for you today, where we're going to look at the Google search volume and the YouTube search volume that accurately predicted what was going to happen in 2016 when all the polls were way over here. The Google search volume, what people are actually looking for, and the YouTube search volume of what people are actually looking for is a more accurate predictor than these polls with who is actually going to win. And I'm going to get into all of that data in a moment. But first, if it's your first time here, what's good? My name is Sam, and for those of you who are returning, it's good to freaking see you. So let's dive right into it. So I have a Real Clear Politics up here on the left-hand side. These are the most recent polls. These are national polls that are put on by these organizations over here on the left. We've got Economist, Fox, ABC, CNBC. And the thing over here is that every single one of them is predicting that Biden is leading. Kind of interesting, right? So we're not going to touch on all the different biases that come into this when you do polling. We're not going to touch more than just briefly on the sample sizes here. We've got the one of the largest sample sizes here is 1,500 people. So Rasmussen's like, hey, 1,500 people. And then the news, the media, the purporters of the truth say that this sample size of 1,500 people, so 1,500 people are dictating what the collective American public thinks. 330 million people, which is kind of interesting. And we're not going to talk about the sampling methodology here. People called on the phone. Right? We have 250 landlines for this one. This one's from Fox. So this is the methodology when you dive into it. So there's about 1,000 people called, 1,100 people called, and 870-ish on cell phones, and then 250 on landlines. First, this is more accurate than the ones by ABC News, I believe. It was ABC News had it the exact opposite, but then you're like, well, who are you going to get who has a landline? I understand there's certain people who, for certain reasons, have a landline. I know maybe one person, and that's my dad for his security system on his property. But I don't know anybody else who has a landline, in all honesty. I'm sure there's other people for various reasons that may potentially have a landline, but that number keeps going down year after year. There's just no point in having a landline. There's a cell phone. I have 2 cell phones. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to have a landline for me. And I think that makes more and more sense for less and less people to have a landline. Or maybe like the people who like fall down and then like that doesn't automated call or whatever, you know, those commercials. But think about this for a second. If there's a story that is being told in the media about how incredibly horrible somebody is, and then you get a phone call and you're talking to a person, and this one, it said interviews. Yeah, okay, so this is interviews. Yeah. So you're talking to a person on the phone. First of all, you have to have the time and willingness to talk to a spammer, like a robocall, right? I personally have better things to do with my time. Like, it doesn't matter who's calling me. I barely pick up from my friends or family because I just have better things to do with my time. Like, I'll call them back on my terms when I'm ready to call people back. That's not necessarily for everybody, but it is for me. And if you're talking to somebody and if you pay attention to the news at all, which I highly recommend you do not ever watch the news, read the news, or listen to the news, a complete and utter waste of time. I got rid of my TV in 2009 and I do not pay attention to it because it is a complete and utter waste of time, which we're actually going to get into in the next section before we get into all the data around the Google and YouTube search volume. But if that is being put forth and all these horrible things are getting said, do you think that there's a lot of people who care about what other people think and they're going to be afraid to tell the truth? Yeah, it's called the hidden Trump support. There's actually research on that. You can Google it. I think it's out of Cornell University, where the media, they're not trying to like be truthful. They're not trying to be accurate, like portray an accurate representation of what's happening in reality. They're looking for things that they can sensationalize. They're looking for things that they can get advertising dollars. They're looking for things that they can create some type of astronomically horrible crisis, right? And then they can talk about that. Because that's what they do. They don't accurately represent reality. They're not objective in what they say. So let's dive into, this is research actually done, and this is from the Harvard Review. This is from, this is titled, Why the News is Not the Truth. And this is actually from 1995 during the Clinton time, which is going to be kind of interesting when that when she goes to court in the fall. But, and this is just a sub portion here that I wanted to read to you about the research. The news media and the government are intertwined in a vicious cycle of mutual manipulation, myth-making, and self-interest. Journalists need crisis to dramatize the news. Government officials need to appear to be responding to crisis. Too often, the crises are not really crisis, but just joint fabrications. What? This is 25 years ago. And they're like accurately saying what's happening today. Interesting. The two institutions have become so intertwined in a symbiotic web of lies that the news media are unable to tell the public what is true, and the government is unable to govern effectively. Now, what happens when there's this cycle of, as this gentleman, and I should give this guy credit, whoever did this piece of research, Peter Vander Wicken, right? And this is on Harvard Business Review. And if you have a cycle between the news and government of manipulation, myth-making, and self-interest for both parties, because if the news can manipulate the public's mind into thinking that there's a crisis, and that gets them helpful because then they get more views, right? They get more eyeballs, they get more attention, they have something to talk about. The government officials can actually do something productive with their time instead of just spend taxpayer dollars willy-nilly for no fucking reason, right? So they respond in some way so that the news will talk about what they're doing so that they could get reelected and have their own self-interest fulfilled. And then you have somebody like Donald Trump who calls it like it is. And when it's bullshit, he'll call it like it's bullshit. So you have this vicious cycle that's been going on for decades and decades. I don't think anybody can honestly believe or say with a conviction in their heart that they believe the government is doing anything that's going to help the nation in an intelligent way. Local, municipality, state, federal, right? Why do people get into government with nothing and then they leave? When they leave government, they have millions of dollars because they're serving their own self-interest. That's how it works. Don't be naive. You're an intelligent human being. You know how they operate. I'm not saying left or right. It's both sides, right? They're both human. Period. And then you have somebody who doesn't want to play that game. So they get ostracized. And they get complete, utter hack jobs put out on them. Kind of interesting, right? I'm going to reread this last section here before we move on to the next section. We start getting into the method and methodology that we use to accurately predict what would happen in 2016, and we're using the same method for 2020. But first, this is from Peter. Too often, the crises are not really crises, but joint fabrications. What? Sounds like they're talking about this C virus, right? The two institutions have become so ensnarled in a symbiotic web of lies that the news media are unable to tell the public what is true, and the government is unable to govern effectively. The best thing that you could possibly do is educate yourself. And that education is first not watching, listening, or reading any news. Period. It's not going to get you closer to the truth at all. So let's dive into 2016. This is what the polls were saying in 2016. This poll from IBD had Trump leading by 2 points. All the rest of them had Clinton winning, right? And if you look down here, had Clinton winning for the whole entire time pretty much, except for this brief moment here. So what model are we using? Well, as I mentioned, the Google search volume, the YouTube search volume, the two largest sites in the planet, also the two largest search engines in the planet. Google gives us this tool called Google Trends where you can put in the term Donald Trump, Joe Biden, and see the search volume. So what we did is we took a look at the past 12 months before the election. So from November 7th, 2016, all the way back to the 15th of 11/6/2015. And you can see right here that Donald Trump was winning across the board. People were just more interested in him. So what happens in 2020? Right, this is 2016. 2020 is a completely different time period. It feels like 2016 was so long ago. Where do people turn to get their information? Online. And an increasing number of people go to YouTube. The ability to capture somebody's attention is currency. If you want to sell something, you need to have attention. If you want to impact the world, you need to have attention. If you want to do anything, you need to have attention. We can see over the past 12 months in the 2016 time period that Donald Trump almost had a 2 to 1 or 1.75 to 1. So 1.75 searches for Trump versus every one search for Hillary Clinton. This is on the web. If you go over to YouTube, it's even greater. It's kind of interesting. They had, on average, he had 24 to 9 on average. So what that is saying is that 2.5 roughly searches for Trump for every one search for Hillary Clinton. Kind of interesting. We jump into the 90-day time period. Closes the gap a little bit. Still a 20% lead, 30% lead right here. 25-ish% lead. This is over the previous 90 days before the election. Again, you can see that it is a little bit closer, but on average, you can still see that Trump is quite ahead. And then the last time period here is the 30-day time period. And again, this is actually Trump extended the lead here. This is more like a 30%, 35% lead here. And you get to see throughout this time period, most of the time period of this past 30 days, so probably about 2/3 of it, Trump is leading the entire way. And then just in this period of maybe several days here, Clinton gained the popularity, and then Trump took it over right before the election. But this is on the web. Over on YouTube, it tells a little bit different story. He was leading the entire time. Again, this is the 90-day period on the web versus the 90-day period on YouTube. Again, still leading. Kind of interesting. So this, when I backtested it, accurately predicted what was going to happen. These did not. We already know that the media is not trying to tell the truth. We know that there's a ridiculous amount of biases. We know these sample sizes of 1,000 people that they're trying to say represent what the collective of America thinks when there's 330 million people. It's pretty laughable at best. At worst, it's super detrimental to the country. So let's take a look at Donald Trump versus Joe Biden and get into the data. And then finally, we're actually going to touch on Florida, which is a toss-up state, I believe, and see who's winning in Florida versus the polls here. So stay with us for a second. This is over the last 12 months on the web, and you get to see that the lead is actually much greater than Clinton versus Trump. Trump has a lot more attention over the last 12 months on the web. Let's go down to the 90 days. This is the previous 90 days. Again, we have a lot more attention, specifically over the first month or so of the last 90 days. It looked like there was a closing of the gap. You know, you can see the margin between the two. Even Biden had a little bit of a lead in a couple areas here. And then something happened, and it had like a step-up function where Trump has just gained a lot more attention consistently. Let's take a look at the last 90 days here on the web and see what it's like. Again, not even close. Not even close. But let's take a look at the web. So that is the #1 site in the freaking planet. These are searches in the United States only, similar to what happened with Trump and Clinton. Now, this is over the last 12 months on YouTube. This is where Biden does a little bit better. So we can see here that more than 2 to 1. So for every 2 searches, 2+ searches for Trump, there's 1 search for Joe Biden over the past 12 months. But we could see that over the 90-day period, Biden actually gained some ground here, and it's less than 2 to 1. But that would make sense because over the last 12 months, right, we had other candidates who were also in the Democratic primary. So those candidates dropped down now. Now we're looking at just the 2 players, right? So you would expect that the people who are searching for like Elizabeth Warren, Kamala Harris, all these other people are now not going to be searching for them, and maybe they want to learn a little bit more about Joe Biden. So that's the case, but you can still see that there's a significant lead across the board. Again, at the 90-day mark here, the first 30 days, Biden was not doing too bad. He had some nice spikes of attention here. But it's been clear that Trump is still super more interesting for people to look for on YouTube than Joe Biden. Let's go down to the 30-day mark here and take a look at these. Again, across the board, just Trump is just more interesting on here, has more attention. And if we look over here at the data, we can see that at the 12-month mark, it was about 3 to 1. I mean, 3 searches for Trump versus 1 search for Biden. This is on the web. On the 90-day period, it was about a little bit over 2 to 1. On the 30-day period, it was over 2 to 1, 2.2 to 1. And that was on the web. And then on searches on YouTube, which is the second largest site search engine in the world, way bigger than Bing. I don't know why anybody would ever use Bing, but maybe just to see diversity, something different than what Google would offer. Again, 2 to 1, pretty much across the board here. So what is actually going on here? Because when we look at this, the polls say something else. Again, just like they did in 2016. But when we look at reality, right, in 2016, what people were actually interested in, like calling people on the phone that might be afraid of getting judged, right? This is from the Fox News poll, that they're calling people on the phone and interviewing them. And if the media is just constantly putting all this crap, right, and just trying to sensationalize everything, do you think that somebody might be afraid to tell the truth for fear of judgment? I mean, look at somebody who just doesn't even want to cut in line in the grocery store, or doesn't want to talk aloud because they're afraid of getting looked at in a restaurant. It's a real thing. You can look it up yourself. But let's understand what is going on in Florida, because I think when you look at it on a national level, it says one thing, but once you dive into the nitty-gritty, it's even more interesting. So in Florida, we have a tie here, and this is Trafalgar, or whatever this name here is. This is some type of polling organization in Florida. There's Fox News, CBS, and CNBC, and then Gravis. They all have Biden winning, or on one occasion they had a tie right here, right? But it looks like, if you look at their graph here, it looks like that is opening up, meaning Trump is losing ground, or maybe they were. By the way, when you do polling, one of the things that you do is called stratification. So effectively, you get all this data, and then literally, you manipulate this data. They call it making assumptions about the data. What it is, manipulating the data to try to fit reality. So if your data looks like this, it can't fit reality, right? So you have to manipulate the data so that it can fit into reality. That is what stratification is. And we can see here that supposedly Biden is leading. Again, they have sample sizes that are ridiculously small. In a state that has 20 plus million people in it, to say that a sample size of 500 people is going to accurately predict which way the state is going to go is going to be laughable. Laughable. Now, let's look at reality. So this is search volume specifically in Florida over the last 12 months on the web between Donald Trump and Joe Biden. Again, what's going on here? Reality says this, but this, whatever you want to call it, says something else. Remember, we both know the news is intertwined with the government. The news is not even slightly the accurate representation of reality. They're not trying to tell you the truth. They're not trying to be objective. Let's take a look at YouTube search volume. This is where Biden does a little bit better. You could see that there's at least a couple touches here in terms of similarity in the amount of attention. But let's dive over to the 90 days here on YouTube, where you can see that this looks way more close. There's still more peaks here that are blue than red, which would represent Donald Trump, right? There's, at the beginning, the first half of the 90 days, it looks like it could be about equal, right? There's a bunch of blue here. There's a couple red spots here, a couple more red spots right here. But on average, in the first half, it could be about equal. When in the second half, there's definitely a lot more blue. Let's take a look at the last 90 days. This is searches only in Florida on YouTube, which is, again, the second largest site in the planet, and one of the major places people go, 55 and under, to get their information. So here, again, we have about a 50% lead for Donald Trump in terms of search volume, what people are actually looking for. Let's take a look at the web quickly to understand. Again, this is a 2-to-1 lead here, more than a 2-to-1. 2 searches for Trump versus every 1 search for Joe Biden. So, given the information I've shown you right here, you are a smart, intelligent human being. I think when you're honest with yourself, you already know this, that the news is not the truth. Now, what are you going to do about it? I would ask you to share the video with somebody else if you want to spread the truth. If you want to break that vicious cycle that literally, remember, this is 1995 and it talks about the fabrication of myth-making and the manipulating the public and the self-interest between both parties. Like, if you want to get rid of the corruption in the government, I don't give a fuck if you're left or right. It doesn't fucking matter to me. If you want to get rid of that and actually focus on the truth and what is going to be the best, share this video with somebody. Press that like button. If you guys have any questions or thoughts, leave them down below or jump over to Instagram. There's a link down below for Instagram. I appreciate you guys' time and I will talk to you soon. By the way, don't forget to press that subscribe button for tomorrow's video. We're going to be covering another ranking with more data. Also, if you look at it, this is millions and millions of data points versus the couple hundred to 1,000 plus that's over here versus the million of search volume. So tomorrow we have another ranking. So make sure to press that subscribe button and the bell notification. Peace.